Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Connected Wellness Podcast. I am Rachel Ann. I'm here with Marianne and a very lovely special guest, and we are all passionate about wellness.
Here in this podcast, we look at the ways our physical, emotional, and spiritual health is all connected and how we can take better care of our whole selves holistically so we can live our best lives. We're really excited that you're here with us on the journey. Welcome back to episode 35 of the podcast. And
Yes!
actually, for the first time ever, we have a repeat guest.
Yes!
So that's really exciting. Welcome back, Tara, to
Yay!
the
I'm so
podcast.
honored.
Yeah, I was
Thank you
thinking
for
that. Like,
having
this
me.
is, we're always like, oh, maybe we'll have them back, but this is the first time we were like, all right, you're coming right on back. We need to keep talking
Thank
about
you.
this. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so
So we're
honored.
gonna like pick off or take off from where we left off last week or last time on boundaries, right? There's so much to be said about it. We definitely didn't get to finish the conversation. It's probably never ending conversation about boundaries. So we wanted to keep going with that. But let's talk wellness wins.
Yeah, let's do it. Who wants to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. I feel like I always jump in. Guys, it's the teacher in me that when I solicit for participation, I'm always waiting for someone to jump in and do it. So sorry, I do it because, I don't like that waiting part. But okay. So my wellness win is about the eclipse. So this was the week that we had the solar eclipse here in the United States, or for part of the United States. And in Pennsylvania, where I am, we were like over 90% totality. It was, pretty close. I wasn't in the line of totality, but, so obviously I had work, but I was going to be able to get home like right in time, for it. But the way I normally function is like, okay, after work, I'm going to work out, and then I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. Like, I'm very structured. But this time the weather cleared up like perfectly just in time. I had my legit glasses that were not going to burn my retinas. I was ready to go. And it's like a hour or more like that it's like happening, and then there's the darkest part, and I just let myself sit out there on the deck and enjoy this experience, looking up in my glasses. I made myself a nice coffee. Like, I was just like, maybe I should go inside it. I was like, no, you know what? This is like a time to just sit and enjoy. And it really did inspire a lot of awe. It made me feel thankful to God, that the clouds cleared up in time, and just that I could experience something so cool. So giving myself that permission to just like rest and enjoy the moment, that was pretty big for me. So I'm calling that a win.
Wow. That is
I
a
love
really
that.
big win. You allowed
Yes.
yourself to rest and relax.
Yeah. And to actually delight and enjoy God's creation. That's
Absolutely.
wonderful.
Yeah. And I'm like now a big eclipse geek, and I can't wait till the next one. I told Chris, I'm like, we're traveling to Montana or wherever this is next time. Like, I want to go. This is cool. Yeah. So yeah.
I love
What about
that.
you guys?
Okay. I can
You want to
jump
go for it,
in.
Tara?
Yeah. So last Saturday, I went, and actually Rachel as well. We attended a conference. There will be fruit, and one of the biggest lessons from that conference that I took was the importance of rest. And so the next day, this past Sunday, y'all, I slept. When I said, I cannot recall. So like when I left the conference, I was joking. I was like, this was such a full day. It was really great networking, communicating with everyone. And I said, I'm asleep for 14 hours. I was joking, but no, I for real slept like all day Sunday. Yeah, all day Sunday.
Wow.
And it was so good for me. Like, it was a day of nothing, and I didn't feel guilty about it. Like, there were certain things I had to like shift from my calendar, but I think thinking about our conversation about our capacity, I was like, yeah, I can't function to the best of my abilities today, like trying to push through, and I'm tired. So yeah, I had a whole day of rest. I've been having really cool conversations with folks about Sabbath and rest, and like, what does it look like to incorporate that on the regular as a preventive thing and not just like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I need to crash for the day.
Mm-hmm.
But let me tell you, that sleep was good. I have a weighted blanket. So that's another wellness win. A weighted blanket, get one. So that's it for me.
I love it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, girl. Get your rest, get your Sabbath. And so the weighted blanket, you find that the hype is real?
It is. I
Okay.
do wish that the colors came brighter than just this depressive gray. I feel like every weighted blanket I find is just in this drab gray color. But there's just something about like being held in that way. I know there's a science to it. There has to be. But just something about like being in clothes. It's just the perfect weight. I think mine is only 15 pounds. And it's great. Very comforting.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Rest is so important, y'all. The conference was really good. It was about like rest and Sabbath, and I think a lot of people needed to hear that. Yay, wellness win for sleeping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
My wellness win is it's kind of random and cheesy, but the amount of joy it brought me, I was like, this is a win. So I typically make oatmeal as like it's one of the breakfasts that I go to that I make pretty regularly, and I usually use fresh fruit in it. But the problem with fresh fruit is that it doesn't always like stay fresh unless you like eat it all within like 2 days. I'm not typically eating a whole tin of blueberries in 2 days, so usually I have to like stress myself to eat all of it, or I end up throwing some away, which sucks, and I hate doing that. So on social media, I saw that people were starting to do like frozen fruit, and they were putting that in the oatmeal. And I was like, oh my God, that is so smart. And so I tried that today, and it was amazing. It was frozen cherry, blueberry, and raspberry, and I put it in my oatmeal, and it was so good. It like I don't want to say melted, but it thawed and was like regular schmegular fruits. So I wasn't like, I was worried that I was going to chew into something really, really freezing. And I was like, this is so delightful. And I'm not wasting food. And this is so yummy. Like it made me so happy. I was like, this is a financial wellness win. My soul is happy. My stomach is happy. So it's like a physical wellness win. So that's something that has been bringing me joy, that I'm like, this will be a thing that I'll be doing more often.
I love that,
And
because
I
especially
love
in
that
this
when
economy.
yeah. And I love when social media hacks actually like work, right? You're actually like,
yes.
oh yeah, I'm actually going to do this. Not like, are you kidding me? Because I had a are you kidding me one recently trying to make sweet potato brownies. Like, yeah, major fail. Major.
Oh,
I'm
Yeah,
so
so I'm glad
sorry.
yours
delicious,
worked.
though.
Yeah. It sounds right, but no, it did not work. It did not even
Dang.
like form a thing. Like it was just like mush.
No.
You know what I mean? Like came out of the oven as mush. It like cooled down as mush. It just like didn't. But anyway, yeah,
Just
we're
straight
talking
up
wins,
mush.
not fails here. So I'm happy that your hack, definitely worked for you. That's great. Yeah.
Thanks.
Nice.
Thanks so much, y'all. Good job, Wellness Wins team.
Yay. Okay, but you know what I realized we forgot? Just in case anyone has not heard about who our wonderful guest Tara is, let's go ahead and reintroduce her.
Yeah, let's talk about the amazing Tara. So Tara Hughee is a New York-based therapist with a degree in pastoral counseling and spiritual care. She is the founder of Tara Hughee Mental Health Counseling. Through her studies and work, she emphasizes the importance of supporting one's mental, emotional, and spiritual health. She's also my friend. She also has 5 million cool glasses, and I just am like, I just want to be like you when I grow up. And she's just a joy to be around. So welcome again, Tara.
Yay.
We're so happy to have you here to wreck us again about boundaries.
Yeah, we had such a great conversation about what exactly are boundaries. And I love the way that you put it, that there are these relational expectations, right, that we set up that allow us to feel safe and seen and actually connected in our relationships. We talked about how boundaries are like a fence, that they're kind of firm, right? But that we have some flexibility to allow things in and out. So it was a really good conversation. We also talked about how it takes so much courage to set boundaries because not
Yeah.
everyone will receive them well.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but it's really about advocating for ourselves, allowing us to protect ourselves, right? This keeps us separate from the outside world in a good way.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's so much that we did talk about, but so much still that needs to be discussed. So yeah, did I
Mm.
miss anything? What are some highlights of what we talked about last time?
I think one of the things that came to mind from last episode is that we have the right and agency to set boundaries, and that there are times where we may be setting boundaries and somebody may not like the boundaries that we set, and that can actually be proof that we need to be setting that boundary.
Mm.
So I think that was really helpful. And then also the collective, I don't know, collective commiserating about the pain that goes behind the scenes of setting a boundary, and like, what are people going to think, and like, how do I process this relationship that this person is not responding to my boundaries, and can I handle it? The emotional toll that it can take, and that shouldn't stop us from setting boundaries, but it is something that is along the process.
Yeah.
Those were the things that have really stuck with me from that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, I loved that. I also appreciated Rachel. You, I believe, introduced this point about how we can't hold people to unspoken expectations,
Hmm.
Mm,
sort of like unspoken, unwritten expectations. Because, yeah, we're expecting then for folks to be mind readers, and so much of it, once again, courage. It calls for the courage to speak up for what we want and what we need in our relationships. So we can't hold folks to a standard that they don't know.
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whew.
So I was able
Mhm.
to have a couple conversations with some listeners after this episode came out, and one of the things that was brought up, I thought this was interesting, that it seems like the most difficult boundaries to set are in our closest relationships. So with a
Mm,
partner, with our parents, with like other family members, more so than with friends or coworkers, or in a service capacity like we talked about last time. So, they brought up the question, how do we set and enforce these boundaries, especially while still trying to love in a sacrificial manner, right? As
mm,
Christians, we want to emulate Christ and his sacrificial giving, self giving love. So I thought that was such a great question and a point of
mm-hmm.
discussion. And
Mhm.
like, for example, I absolutely love, 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 love my husband, and I would do anything for him, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have any sort of boundaries. So how
Mm,
can we, establish things that will be healthy in those close
Mhm.
relationships? Yeah.
hmm,
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that question. And I think when we're thinking about, okay, how do we set these boundaries? And one of the most important pieces is like to center Christ in that. I think a big piece is like, how can we look at Jesus's example
mm,
with the way in which he existed in relationship with others, that he served very lovingly, very radically, and still centered his time with the Father.
Hmm.
mm,
So it was mentioned even last episode how Jesus would make time for solitude. Um, there would also be times where Jesus had his select few that he would hang with from the disciples as well. Um, I think another part of boundary work is being clear in who we are and what our responsibilities are. That's what we talked about last week. And I
mm,
think Jesus was one of the clearest about, who he was
mm,
and, what his mission was. One of like, I find to be like one of the funniest stories out of the Gospels is when Jesus is young and Mary and Joseph, they like lost Jesus and they go back and find him. And he's like, I'm being about my father's business. Like Jesus was clear
Hmm.
from a young age about like who he was and what his responsibilities were. So I
mm,
think part of it is getting clear in that way. In what does being a heart-filled servant look like? How did Jesus model that, and how did Jesus also model that rest so that we can have that capacity? So that's one piece of it.
Hmm.
mm,
The other part that I'm hearing is about like with our close relationships. Those can sometimes be the challenge. Um, I often encourage my clients to start with the relationships that you feel safest in.
Mm,
So, what are the relationships that have at least demonstrated that it's okay to have some level of conflict, that you don't feel activated or triggered in conflict with this person? Those are the places that we can start that practice.
mm,
So, I think about, I'll pick on my younger sister really quick. So, my sister Jessie, um, what I love about our relationship is how much we've learned how to model healthy boundaries with one another. And it wasn't like we woke up one day and or that because we're sisters that we just automatically know how
mm,
to be in relationship with each other, which is so interesting that like, with siblings that were born in relation to one another and we're just expected to know how to relate to one another. And
mm,
so part of my work within my relationship with Jesse is we had to lean into really hard conversations, but because there was already that level of safety, like we were able to meet each other there.
mm,
So when Jesse would open up to say, "Hey, when you joke about that, that actually hurts my feelings." Like for me, it was doing the work of like humbling myself to
Mm-hmm.
say, "Oh, okay, I'm not going to, repel this. I'm going to lean into that accountability."
mm,
And likewise, like when I'm feeling hurt by something, or if I feel hurt or I feel that, there's some sort of pivot that I'd like for us to make in our relationship, she likewise will like lean in when I call her in as well. There might be
mm,
that initial sort of like ruffling of the feathers, like, "Oh, but you do." But ultimately, it's a relationship that we've both feel safe in. And so we're able to have that humbling and that accountability. So I think part of it is, being able to start there and then work your way to the more challenging
mm,
relationships.
Mm-hmm.
mm. Wow. It's kind of like building a muscle and getting like more comfortable with just beginning to verbalize what your needs are and
Mm-hmm.
beginning to feel comfortable to put yourself out there and say, hey, this is a need that I have. This is something I'm wondering if we can put and have as part of our relationship. It also sounds like in that relationship that you described with your sister, that there's that sense of psychological safety that
Mm-hmm.
says that, hey, like, I love you, I'm here with you, and I want to be held accountable. I want to be corrected. So if I am doing something to hurt you, please let me know. Right? That psychological safety allows us to show up authentically because we trust that that person will correct us and that person will love us and nourish us and all of the things. So that
Mm-hmm.
could be a thing to think about is the relationships that have that psychological safety aspect
Mm-hmm.
to it, and you feel comfortable and you notice there's a need for a boundary. It sounds like you're saying to start off with those and then get comfortable with that and then potentially go to ones where there may not be as much psychological safety, or there is a risk that they're going to be really upset and potentially mean with their language and their tone and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it, for those who have grown up with experiences where conflict meant some form of trauma, it's a way
Mm,
that we can relearn relationships by starting in those places that we feel safe. We can like begin to see that, okay, on the other side of conflict, it doesn't have to mean turmoil. It could
mm,
actually be an invitation of, here's how you can love me better in this relationship
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
that I'm inviting you in. And I think, allowing that sort of humbling, that sort of accountability, as you said, creates that psychological safety.
Mm,
Mhm.
mm,
Yeah,
wow.
I think this is very interesting because as much as I may feel safe in these close relationships, there's still balancing that with I don't want to let them down, or I don't
Mhm.
want to disappoint them in it because I love them so much and because it's such an important relationship to me. I think that's where some of the challenge with these closest relationships come from. That if I really love my spouse unconditionally or my parents or my sister, whatever it is, that nothing should be, there's nothing I shouldn't do for them, right? Even if it's imposing on my, mental health or whatever, because it's taking too much time or energy or whatever it is. So I think that's where some of us have a problem. That even
Mm.
if there's that sense of safety, I just don't want to, let anybody down.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is nice, right? We're being caring about how we are treating our neighbor. We care. We want to be nice to people. We want them to have positive experiences. And also, there's a limit to that. If being so caring to them means we're harming ourselves, then how caring is that? And if
Hmm.
that person really loves us and cares about us, then they wouldn't want us to do
Sure.
something that would harm ourselves for them. So it's hard. I think as Christians, especially as Christians of color and Christians who maybe come from immigrant households where we're just used to thinking about the collective, we're used to thinking about the community, we're used to thinking about the whole. It's hard to see how we shouldn't harm ourselves to better everybody else all the time. But boundaries calls us to examine that and to
Hmm.
see the very real weight of what happens when we don't do that.
Hmm. I'm especially curious about the part that experiences, that worry around disappointing others. Um, you know, Sometimes it could feel like very like cliche therapy to always like think back to childhood, and it's not this sense of like blaming your parents for everything. So like I'll make that disclaimer: therapy is not about blaming your parents or your family of origin for everything. But I would be curious, like for anyone who is struggling with that worry of disappointment, um, where does that originate from? Like
Mm,
when did that begin? There's I think a point that I especially love supporting clients in, where they come to realize like who they've had to be versus like who they
mm,
truly are,
Mm.
like and who God truly created them to be.
mm,
Um, and so it's, when did you always feel this sense of obligation to meeting, your parents' every need, this cousin's every need? Um, what is the worry? What is the specific worry if you
mm,
don't fulfill that need for them? Is it a reflection of you? Is it in some ways a worry that it would cause harm to that particular person? Um, what does it look like to maybe meet the need in other ways? I'm often asking uh, my clients, like, is there a way that we can outsource
Hmm.
this?
mm.
Um, and I believe that that's actually something we kind of spoke a little
Yeah.
bit about, just to bring in our outside conversation from the podcast. We kind of talked a bit about it last time, which was maybe I might not meet the need, fully in
Hmm.
this way, but
Mm,
maybe I can point you to where that source could be.
Yeah. Sounds like that
mm,
all of this is where that open communication, I think, Rachel, you said last time, over communicating is key. And I agree, because, again, especially if you feel safety in those relationships, then, and so one of you said it, they don't want you to be harming yourselves. If you love them like
mm,
that, they love you too, right? So they want what's best for you too. So it's a matter of communicating your needs. Which, again, for some reason, for some of us, has not always been easy. And Tara, you make a great point of examining, where did this come from?
Hmm.
Why did it start? So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. If I
There's
could
another
even,
thing I was
oh,
thinking about that you said earlier, especially when you talked about Jesus, that he knew his goal, his mission. He was very clear, and that's what helped him kind of set his boundaries, right? Because he was focused, like, this
mm,
is what I need to do. So that's something to even back up before we try and set boundaries. Some of us need some introspection of, okay, what is my
mm,
goal? What is my mission? What are my core values, right? Who is it that I
mm,
want to be, as opposed to who did I have to be, right? Like you just mentioned, Tara, as well. So I think
mm,
that's interesting. Even before the boundaries, there's like some work to be done, backing up a little bit.
yeah,
mm.
yeah, yeah. Because
Wow.
oftentimes it's, I think what folks will just sort of lean back on, it's just how I've always been.
Mm,
And like, let's get curious about that. Is it really? Um, what were some of the like explicit and also the implicit expectations that were placed on you. So for those, for example, who struggle like with perfectionism, there might not have been the explicit language around you need to be perfect, but maybe they noticed that there was a certain celebration they received when they got that A plus versus when they noticed maybe like their sibling got like a B. Oh, my parents responded way better to me than they did to them. Or maybe it's in the way that you were rewarded. Maybe it's in the ways in which you were embraced for certain behaviors. Like these are like the implicit ways in which we're taught these messages. So maybe the parts that feel like they have to always meet these expectations, like of others, you know, where did we learn this? Maybe it wasn't spoken to us, but it was modeled to us instead.
Wow, I think thinking about who we are because of our experiences, and how life has just happened and we've had to adapt and conform versus who we are actually called to be by God is such an interesting. That's like a really interesting reflection question. And it makes me think about sometimes like social media or just online in general, there's this sense that like we're overusing boundaries or potentially using boundaries in a way that's not actually helpful. So I don't know. I'm curious if you have thoughts about, are there times where we use boundaries and it actually prevents us from growing, or we are saying the word boundaries, but we're actually not, it's not actually boundaries. We're just using that because we think that's what we're doing and it's actually not helpful for us.
Yeah, that reminds me of like why definitions are so important. I think with social media, with pop culture, we've seen so much about, you know, the ways in which boundaries, the term is misused. There's so many other terms that's maybe for another day, but you know, like how everyone's a narcissist or everyone is like, oh, I'm being bipolar, and it's there's so many terms that are misused. So I think it comes down to like definitions and why they're
Yeah.
so crucial. Um, I think the question that I have, especially when it pertains to comfort zones, is this actually a boundary, or perhaps am I being risk avoidant? I think a
Mm.
lot of the I think a lot of the language tends to hold it's riddled with nevers. So like I never do this, or I that's just the way I am. And I feel like so much of therapy, but also I think just like life period is the tension between like where we are and where we want to be.
Mm.
So
Wow.
so yeah, so I circle back to that question of like, is this a boundary? Like, is this a boundary, or is am I in some ways being risk avoidant? That there
Mm.
is something perhaps that I am longing for, but I'm talking myself back in to this comfort zone here.
I don't
Mm.
want to put you on the spot, but do you have an example of that? Because that's such. I feel
Oh
like
yeah.
this is very possible for a lot of us. So yeah, I'm curious to hear
Yeah.
an
Mm,
example.
yeah. I'll speak of a personal example. I'll just put myself on, yeah, put myself on the spot. So I think I don't want to speak for all Black folks, but I think, especially around like travel, for instance, there is this sense of like, oh, like we don't go, or is it safe? You know, and that comes
Mm.
from a very real trauma. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I do travel places, I very much am wanting to know, like, will I see me there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and But before I got even comfortable with the idea of traveling, um, I just always talked myself out of it because I was like, oh, like I've never been outside the country. Like, what if I don't know the language? There, and yet I had friends that were just like, it was such an eye opening experience for them to go, to be able to experience another culture. And so, excuse me, I need to get my water.
Water breaks are allowed here.
Appreciate it. We're all for wellness. And so, um, and so at the time, So there were, actually, I think Rachel, you also know Precellis, who does
Mm.
retreats through Full Collective.
Mhm.
She was doing, retreats, and it was this space where I was like, oh, wow, like here are these women that look like me that are doing it. And so there was that a longing there because I was like, it looks like it's cool, like they're doing it.
Mm.
I was worried about cost, but I'm like, okay, it looks like they're making it work. And I said to myself, you know what, Tara, like the next trip, I don't care where they're going, I'm going with them.
Mm.
And I remember telling my family, and my dad was sort of like, "You're going where? You're going what?" Because the trip ended up being to Bali, and like mind you, like I barely have like I've gone on a cruise that like hit within the Caribbean, but like to go like all the way
Mm-hmm.
across 12 hours away, and I was like hit with that worry of like, oh my God, did I agree to something that maybe I shouldn't have? Like, should I back out? Can I afford this? It was all of the questions, and I was trying to talk myself back into like what felt familiar.
Mm.
But it was like a trip that totally changed my life in the sense that I got to see much more of the world. I got to try new things. And unfortunately COVID hit the next year, so I didn't get to travel much
Mm.
sooner, but I am traveling again in a couple of weeks. But but yeah, it was just a way that I was able to grow outside of my comfort
Mm-hmm.
zone. Like, yes, I acknowledged there were risks involved. There were some things that were generational, which were the sense that like, is it safe for Black people to even go where you're going?
Mm.
Some of it was like financial, which is real. I got to keep my
Mhm.
lights on and all that stuff. But I realized like there was a tension between like where I was and where I wanted to be, and ultimately I had to push through that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So
Mm.
the boundary could have been like, oh, I don't do travel. I don't try new things, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is. But I realized it kept me contained in a lot of ways. And I
Yeah.
feel
Mm.
like there was so much that I learned about myself through that experience. So I realized the ways that I was being risk avoidant, that on the other side of that was actual growth, not that it would be any sort of like hindrance for me.
Mm.
Mm. Wow. That's a really good example because it's yes, like you want to be safe. So that's great. We want to
Mhm.
honor that. But I think you were able to realize that there was such a focus on this thing that was potentially taking away opportunities for you to grow in ways that you want to grow. And there are ways to meet that need to make sure that you are safe. So you are with a group,
Mhm.
you're with people who look like you. So there's a sense of safety there in that regard as well. And you were able to provide the answers for the real concerns that you had, and that allowed you to grow and do what you wanted to do. That's a really good
Mhm.
example. I feel like I definitely, and a lot of people I know definitely relate to that because that's a
Mm-hmm.
question that we ask, especially now in the world that we live in today. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, what is it going to be like if somebody like me goes to a country like that? You
Mhm.
know, how does that bode for my overall health?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this could also exist relationally too. So yes, within
Mm.
travel, but it can exist in like the nevers that we make in
Mm-hmm.
relationships. Like for clients that I work with that are trying to date, that they know they want to exist in, in new relationships, exploring romantic relationships, but it's like, oh, I don't date. I never date.
Mm.
I don't do that. And
Mm-hmm.
they realize there actually is that longing
Mm-hmm.
that they have.
Yeah.
It's not so much that they don't want to, it's that the risk feels so big. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes we got to work with the fear that's there, which is very legit, to be
Mm.
able to get to that other side of where they want to be.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, or I don't date this specific type of person, or, this is a
Mm.
The
non-negotiable.
list, the
Yeah,
list.
exactly. The lists. Yeah. I have too
Yeah.
many
Mm.
friends that have that. But yeah, so this idea of safety is very interesting because that was part of your definition of boundaries, right? So these
Hmm.
expectations that allow you to feel safe. But then in your example here, safety is almost subjective. Of course, there is like some
Mm.
objective things that we need to be safe from abusive relationships and from making terrible decisions. But like you were saying, you didn't necessarily feel safe, but you realized that other people like you were doing it and they were good and they were safe and they were fine and they were thriving. So it's interesting because I think we can think that we're doing something to keep ourselves safe, but we're really being, like you said, risk avoidant. And that's such a hard line to draw, for ourselves. So to figure out, is this a reasonable boundary? Because really it is for my safety, and my well-being, or am I just is this just me being anxious again, right?
Mhm.
Which is
Yeah.
for me
Yeah.
is a common thing for sure. So that's really interesting
Yeah.
too, because that's another step back. So much
Mm.
introspection, like just what we've talked about in the last half an hour, requires, I don't know, years and years and years of therapy for me to like unpack all of
Mm.
this of,
Mm.
what's actually
Mhm.
what I need, what's actually who I want to be, what's actually going to
Mm.
keep me, safe. Like, is it, do
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
guys agree that this safety could be a subjective thing?
If I could
Hmm.
if I could offer one piece, I'll offer
Of
a
course. You can
little
offer many
trauma
things.
psycho.
That's why you're here.
I'll offer a
Yes.
Cover
little
all
bit
Yeah.
pieces,
All of the
please.
pieces. Yes.
of I'll offer a little bit of trauma education and then also a little bit of hope.
Mm.
So when we're born, we are born wired for connection. Like we're born literally in relationship. We're born into relationship with our mothers. In fact, like our sense of like self, it's like we see like us and our mothers like as one, in that way.
Mm.
We're just wired for connection when we first come into this earth. What happens when trauma comes into the picture is that it interrupts things for us, and instead we become wired for seeking safety.
Mm.
Safety becomes the goal.
Mm.
It's that whatever has happened to us, whether it has been a major traumatic event or if it's been a series of traumatic events or circumstances, our brain then changes to where we are really fixated on trying to find safety for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's so wild about our brains is that like the same sort of hormones that get activated if we see like, let's say, like a bear coming at us, is the same kind of hormones that will come into place when we experience the fears within a conflict
Mm-hmm.
with our
Mm.
friends. It's that this does not feel safe. And so I would say the hope, and which is why I speak so much about starting, with the relationships that we feel safest in, because that begins the work of us rewiring ourselves. It's
Mm.
possible. There is a whole science. Neuroplasticity speaks about how our brains are able to change
Mm-hmm.
and shift and grow and evolve. And so with that, change is possible for us. So we get to go
Mm.
back. We can go back to our original wiring, the way God intended for us to exist in connection, in relation with one another. And
Mm.
so part of the work is reflective. How has trauma shaped my view of safety and what danger is?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I be able to grow and lean into some of the discomforts and like very real, like fears,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to shift and to expand the narrative about what it means to be in relationship again. So hope is
Mm.
there. Um, and being able to evaluate the ways in which trauma has permeated our lives, it doesn't have to keep that same hold.
Yeah.
So that's the hope that I would like to bring,
Mm-hmm.
that change is
Mm.
possible.
Yeah.
Amen. We love
Mhm.
neuroplasticity here. We talk about it pretty
Yeah.
much every episode because I feel like it's such a reminder of God's goodness in our
Mm,
lives and the power of the Holy Spirit at work in our lives and our bodies and our minds and our souls is to be like, you actually have the ability to unlearn, to heal, to reframe, to do things differently than what this traumatic experience has has literally shifted your entire body system of doing things. And that's a very real shift. But we have the opportunity to not let that shift be the permanent last thing. We have the opportunity to heal and go to be redeemed and essentially sanctified to become the person that God created us to be, which is to have healthy connections, which is to not have a trauma view of a lot of these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. And I think Titus really agrees with us because we heard him meowing and having a good old time. Titus is Tara's cat. So if you are listening and you're like, I hear some cats, absolutely. Titus is with us. He is present in the podcast and is so supportive of boundaries. So we love Titus. Shout out to Titus.
Yeah, he clearly does not respect my boundaries, but will definitely enforce his own. So love that for him, I guess.
Don't be like Titus, y'all. Have boundaries and respect the boundaries of other people.
Yes.
Well, what I'm hearing about the comfort zone question is that, and this goes back to the idea that boundaries are flexible, right? That maybe we can test a little bit. Like if you ask, okay, is this actually a boundary for my safety, or is this potentially just me wanting to stay comfortable? Is you can test it a little bit, push it a little bit. You went all the way to Bali, and oh my gosh, good for you. That's not pushing it a little bit. That's going pretty much as far as you could go. But for some things, I think we can try and push it a little bit, step just a little bit out of that comfort zone and reassess, how does this feel? Is this actually good for me or not? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think about with the risks that boundary setting has called for sometimes. I think personally of the ways in which it's caused me to challenge, to lean into hard conversations. And I feel like on the other side of those risks, there's been so much reward. It's that my family gets to exist with a healthier me. So does do my friends, my coworkers. With risk, there is also reward. And even if it doesn't turn out, like your first attempts at boundary setting don't turn out as you'd hope, you practice the script, you lay out what you're hoping for, and maybe you fumble a little bit. Like there's still lesson even within it. It's that, okay, I see how that went. I can try it again.
Wow. I appreciate you bringing up the risk part. I know we're wrapping up, so I'll say this super fast. Because something that I think about, especially as, where do I think this comes from? Especially as immigrants or children of immigrants and people of color, I feel like we are, I don't say naturally, but being risk averse is a characteristic that a lot of those people of those communities, me included, hold on to because the world is what it is. And so we are taught to decrease the amount of risk in order to make sure that we are safe. And so for those of us that are listening to this and we're like, wow, this seems really hard and I'm not used to taking risks, you're probably not. And so even in that moment of introspection that I think Tara is really inviting us into and examining what it is about boundaries that is difficult, what is it about the tension of where we are now versus where we want to be, is also the added question of how do we understand risk? In what ways is being risk aversive unhealthy for us and keeping us in our comfort zone? And in what ways are we called to have more risk that is calculated, that is holy, that is well thought out with wisdom, that could potentially help us grow. So that's a takeaway that I'm thinking about is what is I don't know what is the right word for this. These introspection moments of what does the role of risk have in my life, I think is my takeaway.
Yeah. And perhaps even what is the implication of a risk that is viewed through the lens of trauma? It's not to minimize our view of it, but we can think about the things that feel scary as a result of our traumatic experiences, whether it's conflict, boundary setting, trying new things, all these perspectives.
Yeah. Wow. This is so great. Any takeaways before we wrap up, Marianne or Tara?
Just a lot to think about. Yeah, thank you so much for coming back and discussing this with us. And yeah, you feel free, listeners, to share with us what you take away from this conversation, any thoughts you're having about boundaries. Rachel Ann, I know you'll tell them all the ways they can connect with us, right?
Yeah, yes, I will. And a huge thank you to all of y'all that have shared your feedback. It is because of your feedback that we contacted Tara and we're like, I think we need to have a part two. And then we were able to make it happen. So we do mean it when we say that we love to hear from y'all. We want to know what it is you're thinking about, what you need support in, and we want to have an episode about that so that we can be alongside you in that journey. So if you want to submit any feedback, questions, comments, ideas, you can email us. We are at connectedwellnesspodcast@gmail.com. If Instagram is your vibe, awesome. We are there at Connected Wellness Podcast. If you want to reach out to me specifically, I'm at Real with Rachel Ann. If you want to reach out to Marianne specifically, she's at Wabasaba. If you want to reach out to Tara, her DMs are open. She's at Therapy with Tara, if I remember that correctly. Okay. Awesome. All of that will be linked below. We are also on Facebook, Connected Wellness Podcast on Facebook. So please contact us and let us know what it is that you are thinking about boundaries and about life and about wellness. And we are excited to make an episode to just talk about it and figure out what that looks like for us as Christian people. Yeah, and a huge thank you to Tara for dedicating more of her time to being with us, to sharing with us all of the things. Thank you to Titus for being in the background, providing joy as we talk about the hardships of boundaries and being a great example of what boundary setting and boundary breaking looks like. But we are so grateful, Tara, to have you here.
No, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
And I'll hand it over to Marianne.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And until next time, be well.
Yes. Be well, everybody. Bye.